welcome to this credit and debt management revision session. In this session, we're going to be taking a look at task 6, which is the final task in this exam. Now, we'll have a quick chat about what you can expect before we jump straight into this, okay? So task 6 is a written question, so you will be dealing with a few different things, maybe putting the calculator down a little bit, focusing a lot more on the written theory. 12 marks available in total, so obviously a lot smaller than the other written task in this exam, but still a decent chunk of marks that we can pick up. This task is essentially going to revolve around receivables balances and how companies can essentially manage them. The basic way I can describe this to you is to essentially say, you'll be given a scenario, you'll be put within the environment of a fictitious business. This is our credit control policy. These are some receivable balances of varying amounts and dates outstanding. What should we do? What is the appropriate step at this stage of our credit control process? You will then simply give your commentary onto that, okay? That essentially sums it up. So again, you need to be able to find the information and obviously interpret it and tell me about it. There's a bit of a nuance with tasks like this, and it revolves a little bit around just using your common sense. It's not just a case of applying a very, very rigid policy. The AAT are going to look at this and say, again, are you able to understanding what's happening? If it's a long-standing customer, is it a customer where should we immediately go to enforcing legal action, or is there something else we can do? Any sort of communication channels, any sort of relationships that we can try and establish in that respect? If it's a new customer, how would we deal with that? So the niche in this will be that, yes, there is a policy to apply, but the policy itself, what about the flexible elements of it? Should we speak to this customer? Is it a long-standing loyal one? Are they normally a very good payer? Or are they a traditionally poor payer? Looking for the extra content in the questions is really important. So let's have a look at what we're being asked to do here. We're told that Corp Limited supplies goods to high street shops. The standard terms and conditions on every invoice include a retention of title clause and a standard payment term of 30 days. You work in the credit control department. Your manager is on holiday, but has left you some notes on the outstanding accounts that need to be dealt with before she returns. Below is an extract of those procedures. Now, I'm going to pull this up on the screen. There's quite a few steps here, and as this is essentially going to be on a recording, I'm not going to run through all of these one by one and take up 5 minutes of the video. At this stage, I encourage you to pause it and just have a quick look at these different policies. So, how the orders come in the initial situation, the documentation to get the goods out, how we raise the invoices, and how we then chase those debts, okay? So again, have a pause and have a look through. We are going to refer back to this as we're going through the questions as well, because obviously this is going to be sort of our framework for how we deal with things. We are then told to review the information provided for each of the 4 customers below and prepare an action plan for collecting any outstanding amounts. Your plan should include a brief summary of the options available to the business and recommendations for provisions or the writing off of irrecoverable debts. So what it's trying to say there is, again, you're going to get 4 scenarios that will all be slightly different than each other. Different amounts, debts overdue of different ages, but equal to that, different types of customers. So again, when it's talking about these sort of relevant plans, the credit control policy is, of course, the framework for those plans, but we can still deal with things not differently, but we can have alternative approaches. It can be as simple as making contact with a long-standing customer, or sort of doing further investigations on the solvency of a business. There's lots of other options available as well. And this is probably where people do trip up in these sorts of questions, because they will get the marks for just applying the policy. But again, in the real world, would we look at situations like this to say, okay, well, you know, they're a long-standing customer. They're not paying particularly quickly, but they always pay us. So maybe there's something else we could perhaps do in the first instance. So this is the key point here. It's giving sort of ideas of options. That's the key point. So one option will be, of course, to just enforce the credit control policies. But are there any other options available? Because if there are, the question will want to see them. So let's look at this first one for Homely Things Limited. Homely Things is a long-standing customer who is known to have a slightly chaotic accounts team, but they always pay their bills eventually. They have an overdue balance of £23,560, which is 65 days overdue. Now, at this point, the first thing to do is talk about, okay, well, then what is the policy and procedure? This is essentially a timeline, okay? We're talking about it in different points, obviously numbers 1 to 12, but it's essentially a timeline of events, and we have to place the relevant company in the relevant section. So now at this stage, we're saying that the debt is more than 60 days overdue. It literally says that, doesn't it? So we are at step 11. So once the debt's more than 60 days overdue, legal action can start to be taken. So that is one option, isn't it? So we can start to write that. Now, for the written sections, again, I'm just sort of going to write the summative points. I'm not going to write what we'd call perhaps a fully comprehensive answer. A, because this video will be 50 minutes of me sitting here in silence, writing word for word. And B, it's not really how I want you to approach these questions. I will express the key points, but I'd want you to talk about those key points in your own way. That's how you build better written skills. It's not about memorizing somebody else's writing style. It's about writing about the key points in a way that you are comfortable with, okay? So for this one, we could say along the lines of, as per debt, overdue by more than 60 days. Then, of course, we're saying that we can start legal proceedings. These can be started with the relevant authorization from the finance director. Of course, that's one option that we have available to us. But again, it's looking for options, and this is where you can start to consider the specifics. It says this is a long-term customer. So we've clearly got a good working relationship with these, and we clearly know what this business is about. Yes, the chaos and the accounts department is slightly chaotic, but as it says, they've always paid debts eventually. We've never had to write anything off. So there is a consideration here, isn't there, that due to this relationship, maybe there is an alternative approach. We could say something along the lines of, due to this long-standing relationship, we could try and resolve the issue without needing that legal proceedings to be taken. So what we're saying there is we can look to resolve this without going straight to the, sending the nuclear button and chasing them legally. We have a long-standing relationship with these. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that we can use that relationship to our advantage and stress the importance of this debt getting paid. It can save a lot of time, it can save a lot of effort with legal fees, and it can also save the risk of sort of damaging the relationship if we don't need to, because going through those legal routes can potentially have implications like that. A final option we could sort of say is to make a provision due to the age, obviously the amount of the debt, provision for the balance can also be made. And I'd say there's enough options there. Okay. Now, again, I'm sort of writing these as like summative points. I want you to dress it up a little bit more. Maybe just give a little bit more context. I'm writing the key points here. Okay. Now, let's move on to customer two, that is Lamps Limited. Let's find out about this one. So Lamps Limited is a new customer, a startup company which has been trading for less than 1 year. So they're a very, very new business. They were very prompt payers at the start of the relationship, but have been paying later and later. There has been no response to a telephone reminder for payment. That was made 27 days ago. The balance outstanding is £540. So again, what I'm going to do is go up to my timeline and say, okay, whereabouts does Lamps Limited sit? Like, where are they currently up to in this sort of timeline of events? Well, we're up to around this point here, aren't we? So, of course, we've sort of sent letters, we've chased payments, but it says if no payment is received within 5 days of the telephone call, obviously at this point we are 27 days overdue, the account must be placed on stop. Okay, equal to that. So that means, obviously, you know what a stop list is. We suspend any sort of sales moving forwards until the debts are satisfied. And equal to that, the sales manager should arrange to deal with them. So the options are the account goes on stop and the sales manager gets in touch with them. Okay, or the account manager, I should say, would be a bit more specific. So let's write those points down. Okay. Lamps Limited. They should be placed, obviously, on the stop list. The account should be put on hold. First things first, isn't it? That's all we need to say in that respect. They're going to put it on stop. Now, again, I'd like you to write a little bit more here. So Lamps Limited should be placed on the stop list, meaning that no further orders will be processed until the debt is settled. So again, I'm sort of writing short just to sort of say this being a 2-hour video, but I'd like you to write a little bit more. Again, I'm writing the key points. I want you to dress them up, give them a bit of bulk in your own way. Okay, they're going to go on the stop list. That means that any further orders will not be released until we are satisfied that the previous debt of £540 has been paid. Okay, you can even say something on the lines of, as no payment was received after the phone call that was chasing it, along those lines. Okay, equal to that, as we've just said, the accounts manager arranged to visit them to solve the issue. Something along those lines. Okay, contextualize as much as you want. We'll talk about the business. Excuse me, no idea it's done that. They're a new business, but as it says, payments are starting to slow. It's a bit of a concern, that, isn't it? Those times are slowing. Oh, excuse me. And we've make a provision against this debt, wouldn't we? Fantastic. So again, a few different points there. You can write them in any order, as long as you're sort of making points, making observations, we've given options, we're talking about what we should do with this debt. Let's look at the next one, which is Rugs Limited. It says Rugs Limited are a long-standing customer who have historically paid on time. They have a total balance of £43,200, which is now over the credit limit of 40k. Of this, 41,500 is now 30 days overdue, with a £1,700 limit invoice 90 days overdue. So again, a few different things. It's quite an interesting one because it's sort of split between 2 points, isn't it? So again, we sort of look at where we are on the timelines. So at this point, there's 2 separate issues here. Now, the first issue is revolving around the invoices that are 30 days overdue. So again, they would sit in the bracket we just looked at. So letters will have been sent, telephone calls will have been made, and obviously the accounts manager should be making a visit to try and resolve the issue. The 90-day one is a bit different, isn't it? Because again, that falls under sort of like the remit of legal proceedings. So it's split between the 2. Basically, it's points 9, 10, and 11 that are relevant for different reasons here. So we can write about these options, and we can write about sort of this customer as well, what is specific about them, okay? So, balance of the first bit. We will have chased this, won't we? That's what we're saying. That will be placed on stop. And that legal action intent. Be sent shortly. The £1,700 is an issue, isn't it? So a provision for this, you could say, would be reasonable to consider. The £1,700 is slightly different, isn't it? The £1,700 is well overdue. So with that one, it's well overdue. So the legal attempts to reclaim the debt should have already happened. So there could be a discussion made that if we can't satisfy the debt being paid, we'd look to write it off at this point. Of course, we always, with these sorts of questions, have to consider the customer, because look what it said, they're a long-standing customer who normally pay on time. This is like out of character, isn't it? So there might be issues here, but again, we should try and extend some sort of communication lines to ascertain what may or may not be happening. These debts are, well, call it what you will, unusual, an anomaly, not consistent. Investigation should take place. And so to try and better understand what's going on. But obviously, hopefully, try and settle the debts as well. Something along those lines. Again, I say I'm writing shorthand. I'm now filling up the whole spaces, aren't I? But again, you could dress these points up and just really contextualize it as much as possible. Now we've got one more point to go, which is for Furnishings Limited. Now it says Furnishings Limited has gone into receivership owing us £8,210. The last delivery was made 2 weeks ago, so the debt isn't actually overdue yet. But based on the situation we find ourselves in, it's very, very unlikely that they will be able to pay the full amount. Doesn't sound, it's not a big stretch, that is it. Now, again, we'll sort of draft up to the timeline and place ourselves on it. Now, of course, at this stage, we're like at the bottom of the pile, aren't we? We're sort of in receivership, insolvency, bankruptcy. It's not a good look, is it? Now, we are also told that we actually have a retention of title. And as this order was only placed moderately recently, it's a fair sort of assumption to say that, we can probably get those goods back. So one of our options, we can reclaim those goods. Well, that's obviously the most obvious option, isn't it? Again, I'd want you could dress this up a bit more. You could maybe tell the reader what that clause means. Essentially, the seller remains the proprietor of the goods until they are paid for in full and the debt is satisfied. Equal to that, we essentially should probably look at getting a provision for this, shouldn't we? Not a provision, sorry, the debt should be written off. Something along those lines, okay? You can add more. We could say something like, obviously, no further orders should be accepted. Again, you could just dress these points up a little bit more. Okay, Last but not least, some additional information on Jane Limited. Now it says the sales ledger account for Jane Limited has accidentally been deleted. The company has asked for a statement in order to confirm their year-end balance. The following information is available. I have an opening balance at the start of December, 36k, and then I have a handful of transactions, some credit notes, some invoices, all throughout the month. And one payment has been received for £10,200. It says prepare a note explaining the status of the account at the end of December. Really straightforward with this. Now, this is a written question. In truth, I'm not really going to write this out. I'm just going to give you the figures because, again, you just, as long as you write about the figures, doesn't matter how you necessarily tell me about them, as long as your figures are correct and everything adds up. I'm trying to work out, okay, well, how much is actually owed? Well, there's an opening balance of £36,000, isn't there? There's two credit notes. Credit note 2681 gives me what, £5,700. Credit note 2754 which is 3,800. Okay, well, that's absolutely fine. Well, what else can I establish here? Now, again, I'm looking at basically the main sort of source of information is the information on the table, of course. But look out for the little bits next to that. We've picked up the opening balance, which is great. And obviously, we picked up the two credit notes. What about that 10,200 that's stood in there as well, Dor? Just keep an eye out for that. 10,200 has been paid, hasn't it? For that payment, £10,200. Now, obviously, the payment terms are 30 days. So at this stage, I'm saying, okay, well, what's left? Balance of £16,300. So again, that's what we're really doing here is just playing with the figures for the most part. And there's not a lot else to it. Again, you can sort of write about the points in your own way, okay? You can even, I know some students like scribble out a T account for stuff like this and then just see what the balancing figures are and all of these sort of different considerations that you can take into consideration, okay? So in terms of the amounts that are actually due, we're now saying that, okay, the account is overdue by the at least 16,300 based on those terms of 30 days, okay? And that's pretty much it. Again, you can play with the figures, you can tell me some different things if you want, but that's really the gist of it. And that is actually the end of this task. Now, of course, the main point will be revolving around these little bits, which we've sort of done in part A. Understanding the credit control procedure is the main one. Knowing what has been done up until this point, knowing what the next steps should be. But you're asked about options. Yes, applying the policy is probably the main option, but we can also look at alternatives. Can we speak to the customer if it's a long-standing claim? If it's a new customer, is this maybe a sign that there are things we need to be concerned about? Is there a sign that some things are worsening, some things are improving? So it's about being able to read between the lines a little bit in terms of the information as well. But with that, we've actually come to the end of our credit and debt management revision sessions. So I hope you found these really, really useful, and I hope to see you in some further sessions.